The episode begins innocuously. A former street racing legend turned small-town sheriff is thrust back into the high-octane chaos of his youth by a relentless and vengeful challenger. Yet beneath its adrenaline-fueled surface, this tale is a study of identity unraveling under the weight of competitive self-destruction. It is not merely a story of speed and rivalry, but a haunting examination of the spaces where identity, power, and moral ambiguity collide. Its narrative arc is simple, but the thematic undercurrents speak to an existential dread as old as myth and as immediate as a clenched fist. Director Tom Holland crafts the episode's visual language with a tension that feels perpetual, as though the characters are forever caught in a liminal state. I really love the racing scenes, as they're drenched in noirish hues and punctuated by the growl of engines, juxtaposed with the stifling quiet of the sheriff's home life. In this episode, light and dark are not merely aesthetic choices, they're more of symbolic battlegrounds. The sheriff's police uniform, tidy, restrained, contrasts with the leather-clad recklessness of his adversary, mirroring the thematic duality of control versus chaos. The camera lingers on these contrasts, inviting the viewer to see not just the characters, but archetypes caught in a cyclical tragedy. The central dynamic of King of the Road is one of entanglement, a man torn between his present responsibilities and the inescapable pull of his past. Gabriel Marcel, a 20th century existentialist, speaks of ontological commitment, the idea that to exist authentically, one must engage with the other without objectifying them. In this episode, however, masculinity warps this commitment into something adversarial. The challenger is not merely a rival, but a projection of the sheriff's unresolved past, an embodiment of his suppressed desires and unacknowledged regrets. Rather than engaging authentically, the sheriff reduces this adversary to an obstacle, perpetuating a toxic cycle of dominance and defiance. Marcel might argue that the sheriff's inability to recognize his adversary as anything more than a threat underscores the isolating nature of hypermasculinity. Spanish philosopher Maria Zambrano offers a lens through which to interpret the sheriff's reluctant return to racing. Zambrano's concept of poetic reason, the idea that truth is best expressed not through rigid logic, but through the fluidity of experience, aligns with the episode's visceral focus. The races themselves are imbued with an almost mythic significance, serving as the sheriff's final confrontation with the ghost of his past. Zambrano might see the sheriff's journey as a poetic tragedy, a man forced to relive his glory days not out of desire, but out of a need for closure. The roar of the engine and the blur of the asphalt becomes metaphors for the sheriff's internal struggle, a chaotic poetry that speaks to the inexpressible. Empirical studies on competition provide a sobering counterpoint to the episode's emotional intensity. The concept of the winner's curse, a term used in economic and psychological studies, highlights the paradox of competitive success. To win often comes at great personal expense. The sheriff's victory on the road were won at too great a cost to have been worthwhile for the victor, each win eroding his relationships and sense of self. Research by Mark Van Voogd on male competition suggests that such behavior is rooted in evolutionary drives but exacerbated by cultural constructs. In King of the Road, these constructs manifest in the sheriff's need to prove his dominance, even at the expense of his own safety and his connection to his daughter. The episode becomes a microcosm of societal pressures that equate masculinity with invulnerability and success with supremacy. Herder's philosophy, which celebrates the uniqueness of individual expression, offers another layer of critique. The sheriff's initial rejection of racing can be seen as an attempt to assert his individuality against the collective expectations of masculinity. Yet his eventual return to the track reveals the tragedy of this individuality. It is subsumed by the very societal forces he sought to escape years ago. Herder's ideas remind us that true individuality requires freedom not just from external pressures, but from the internalized narratives that bind us. The sheriff, unable to fully reconcile his past with his present, becomes a cautionary figure in this way, a man who loses himself in the pursuit of what he once was. Set against the backdrop of the 1990s, King of the Road reflects a time when traditional notions of masculinity were being questioned, yet still deeply ingrained in popular culture. The episode's focus on cars, competition, and rebellion speaks to a nostalgia for a bygone era of unchallenged male dominance. Yet its darker themes, alienation, regret, and the cost of competition hint at the cracks forming in this facade. The sheriff's daughter serves as a quiet counterpoint to the male characters. Her presence a reminder of the relational cost of hyper-competitiveness. In her silence, the viewers hear the unspoken question: what might have been if masculinity allowed for vulnerability instead of violence? Johann Fichte's philosophy of recognition provides a profound framework for examining Sheriff Garrett's motivations. According to Fichte, individuals derive their sense of self through the acknowledgement of others. In King of the Road, Garrett's identity as a former racing legend is reignited not by his own volition, but by the challenger's recognition of his past. This interplay between recognition and selfhood creates a paradox for Sheriff Garrett. While he seeks to distance himself from his racing days, he cannot resist the allure of being seen and validated. Fichte might argue that Sheriff Garrett's actions are not merely about racing, but about reclaiming a lost sense of self through the eyes of his opponent. So, what was it that made this episode a standout? Well, Tom Holland, known for Fright Night and Child's Play, brings a distinct visual style to King of the Road. The episode is soaked in the Americana of street racing culture: dusty highways, roaring engines, and the weight of past glories etched into every frame. Holland's approach is deliberate, balancing the thrill of the race with the quiet, simmering despair of the protagonist, Sheriff Garrett. The episode's pacing mirrors Garrett's internal struggle, oscillating between moments of stillness, reflecting his attempts to suppress his past, and the kinetic energy of the races that define his youth. Holland uses light and shadow to underscore Garrett's duality, with neon-lit streets serving as a metaphor for temptation and the encroaching darkness of his unresolved guilt. The roar of the engine fades, leaving only the low hum of a world indifferent to the scars it carves. A stretch of empty highway stretches into an uncertain horizon, a place where competition is currency and ego exacts its quiet toll. The tale of King of the Road is not one of triumph or redemption, but of restless motion. Men chasing shadows, outrunning racers they refuse to name, Sheriff insisting on authority, Billy's reckless hunger for validation, and Carrie's quiet rebellion are each threads in a tapestry woven from futility and self-deception. The road they travel offers no destination, only an eternal loop of confrontation, compromise, and eventual collapse. Under the streetlight's cold glow, the characters are trapped, not by circumstance alone, but by a system of unwritten rules that demand they play a game where winning is losing by another name. And so, the night falls on this strip of asphalt, a burial ground for 1,000 shattered ambitions. Somewhere in the distance, a siren wails, though it is unclear if it calls for help or heralds another tragedy. The headlights pierce the darkness, illuminating the same questions left unanswered, the same faces turned toward the past. As the screen fades to black, we too are left with a single haunting truth. The race never ends. The finish line is an illusion, and the only victor is the road itself, which endures long after the men who sought to conquer it have burned out and disappeared into the depths. The night stretches on, silent but knowing, as the wheels turn endlessly over cracked pavement. And until we meet again, please remember to stay spooky, and check this video out next.